Jake Martinez was having what he generously called a Tuesday when the sky exploded. One moment he was outside the Arcturus research station, wrestling with a frozen communication dish that had apparently decided to cosplay as a popsicle. But in the next moment, something the size of a small building came screaming through the atmosphere like an angry comet with commitment issues. The impact shook the entire facility, which was impressive considering the place was built to withstand everything from blizzards to the occasional meteorite. Jake watched a chunk of ice the size of his toolbox sail past his head and thought, with the resigned wisdom of someone who'd spent 3 years fixing things that refused to stay fixed, that this was definitely going on his overtime report. The crash site was about 200 meters from the main facility, marked by a crater that looked like someone had taken a giant ice cream scoop to the permafrost. Steam rose from the wreckage in lazy spirals, and Jake could hear the distinct sound of metal cooling and contracting. He grabbed his emergency kit, muttered something unprintable about hazard pay, and trudged through the snow toward what was probably going to be the weirdest thing he'd encounter this week. He was wrong. It was going to be the weirdest thing he'd encounter this decade. The spacecraft, if you could call it that, looked like someone had crossed a fighter jet with a dragon, and then fed the result nothing but protein shakes and bad attitude. Crystalline structures jutted from its hull like frozen lightning, and the whole thing pulsed with a faint bioluminescent glow that made Jake's flashlight seem about as useful as a birthday candle in a hurricane. And then it moved. What Jake had initially taken for part of the ship's superstructure unfolded with a sound like breaking icicles. A head the size of a compact car emerged from the wreckage, followed by a neck that seemed to go on for way longer than necks had any right to. The creature's eyes opened, revealing pupils like twin galaxies, and fixed on Jake with the kind of focus usually reserved for tax auditors and disappointed mothers. Jake did what any reasonable person would do when confronted with a space dragon that had just redecorated the local landscape. He raised his flashlight and said, "You okay there, big guy?" The dragon blinked, slowly. Then it spoke, and its voice sounded like distant thunder mixed with the kind of exhaustion that came from too many double shifts and not enough coffee. "I require assistance." Jake looked at the massive alien, then at his toolbox, then back at the alien. "Yeah, I'm gonna need a bigger wrench." The creature tried to move and immediately collapsed with a sound that suggested several important structural components had decided to quit without notice. Dark fluid that might have been blood seeped from cracks in its crystalline hide, steaming when it hit the snow. "Hunters," the dragon wheezed. "They come. Must warn. Must send message." "Hunters?" Jake glanced around at the empty wasteland of ice and snow. "Buddy, unless they're hunting for frostbite and questionable life choices, I think you're safe here. This place makes the moon look like a vacation resort." The dragon's massive head turned toward him, and Jake caught something in those cosmic eyes that made his smart mouth take a temporary coffee break. Fear. Real, genuine, bone-deep terror. "You do not understand," the creature said. "They follow my wake signature. They will be here soon. And when they arrive, they will kill everything that breathes to ensure their target does not escape." Jake looked back toward the research station, where 17 people were going about their daily routine of complaining about the heating, the food, and the Wi-Fi, in roughly that order. 17 people who had no idea that their biggest problem was about to upgrade from frozen internet to homicidal space bounty hunters. "Well," Jake said, shouldering his toolbox with the resignation of someone who'd just realized his quiet Tuesday had been promoted to terrible life decision. "I guess we'd better figure out how to get you patched up and out of here before the bad guys show up." The dragon stared at him for a long moment. "You would help me? You do not know what I am or what I have done." Jake shrugged. "You crashed, you're hurt, and apparently something scary is chasing you. Back home, we call that Tuesday. Plus you asked nicely, which is more than I can say for my last 3 bosses." For the first time since the crash, something that might have been hope flickered in those galactic eyes. "My name is Zephyr. Jake Martinez, maintenance and repair. And right now, you look like you need both." Getting a wounded space dragon into the service bay of a research station turned out to be exactly as complicated as it sounded, plus tax. "Zephyr, despite being roughly the size and weight of a small aircraft, moved with surprising grace when he wasn't busy bleeding exotic fluids all over Jake's work area. The dragon had managed to squeeze most of his bulk through the bay doors, though his tail still stuck out into the snow like the world's most expensive draft excluder. So Jake said, running a diagnostic scanner over a particularly nasty gash in Zephyr's flank, Space Dragon. That's new. Or, we get a lot of weird stuff here, but usually it's just researchers who've been staring at ice samples too long and start seeing patterns that spell out their ex's name. I am not a dragon, Zephyr corrected, though he didn't sound particularly offended. My species are called the Aetherian. We are explorers, cartographers of the void between stars. Jake nodded sagely. Right, so space cartographer. That explains the fancy light show. He gestured at the bioluminescent patterns that rippled across Zephyr's hide. Very cosmic. Very cosmic. The patterns indicate my emotional state and health status. Currently, they are saying that I am in considerable pain and mild confusion as to why a maintenance worker is treating my wounds with what appears to be industrial sealant. Hey, this stuff works on hull breaches and broken hearts with equal efficiency. Jake applied another layer of biocompatible patch compound to the wound. Besides, you said hunters were coming. I'm assuming they're not the type to wait around while we figure out proper xenobiological medical procedures. Zephyr's patterns shifted to what Jake was starting to recognize as the equivalent of a grimace. The Void Hunters are mercenaries. They accept contracts from the highest bidder and pursue their targets across star systems with relentless efficiency. They are also. And here Zephyr's voice took on the tone of someone describing a particularly unpleasant dental procedure, dramatically inclined. Dramatically inclined? They believe that intimidation is enhanced by theatrical presentation. Expect elaborate speeches, unnecessarily complex weapons, and at least one monologue about the futility of resistance. Jake paused in his patchwork. You're telling me we're being hunted by space drama queens? Extremely competent space drama queens with advanced weaponry and a complete lack of concern for collateral damage. Before Jake could respond to that cheerful bit of news, his comm unit crackled to life. Jake, you out there? We picked up some kind of seismic event about 20 minutes ago. Jake grabbed the comm, covering the mic while he looked at Zephyr. That's Reeves, the station director. What do I tell him? The truth would be inadvisable, Zephyr said. Your species has not yet made formal contact with the galactic community. My presence here is, technically, a violation of several interstellar treaties. So we're looking at first contact via crash landing and alien bounty hunters. Great. Jake keyed the comm. Yeah, Doc, I'm checking it out now. Looks like a meteorite impact. Nothing too exciting. Need any help? Nah, just gonna poke around, make sure nothing important got damaged. You know how it is. Copy that. Let me know if you find anything interesting. Jake clicked off the comm and looked at Zephyr. Okay, so we've got maybe an hour before someone comes looking for me, and you've got homicidal space mercenaries on your tail. What exactly are we dealing with here? Zephyr's patterns shifted to deep blue and silver, which Jake was starting to interpret as serious business mode. I carry information vital to the survival of multiple star systems, including yours. The hegemony, a collection of conquering species, plans to expand into this sector. Earth is on their list. Of course it is. Jake set down his tools and rubbed his face. Let me guess, they're not coming to share recipes and discuss the weather. They strip mine planets for resources and convert the populations into labor forces. Your species would be classified as Category 7 biological assets. I'm afraid to ask what that means. Moderately intelligent, suitable for manual labor, high reproductive rate. Essentially, cosmic livestock. Jake stared at the alien for a long moment. Then he started laughing. Not the happy kind of laughing, but the kind that usually preceded someone making spectacularly poor life decisions. Okay, he said, wiping his eyes. Okay, so we've got invading aliens who want to turn humanity into space cattle. And the only thing standing between us and a future of intergalactic servitude is a wounded space cartographer, and a guy whose greatest professional achievement is keeping the coffee machine working in sub-zero temperatures. When you put it like that, it does sound rather hopeless. Hopeless? Jake picked up his wrench and gave it a speculative twirl. Buddy, you clearly don't know humans very well. We once fought a war over a bucket. We've built entire industries around arguing with strangers on the internet. You think a few space bullies are going to scare us? Zephyr's patterns brightened noticeably. You will help me transmit the warning? My shift doesn't end for 6 hours, and this is definitely the most interesting thing that's happened since Peterson tried to make vodka in the generator room. Jake shouldered his toolbox. Besides, I've always wanted to save the world. I just figured it would involve less alien blood and more explosions. There may yet be explosions, Zephyr said helpfully. Now you're talking my language. The Void Hunters arrived with all the subtlety of a marching band having an argument with a fireworks factory. Jake was helping Zephyr navigate the corridor toward the communication array when the entire station shuddered and the lights flickered. Emergency klaxons started wailing, which was never a good sign, and Jake's comm unit erupted with panicked chatter from the research staff. That's not the heating system, Jake muttered. No, Zephyr agreed, his bioluminescent patterns shifting to what Jake was pretty sure meant "oh crud" in Space Dragon. That is a boarding protocol. They have attached to your station's hull. Attached? They can't just dock like normal people? The Void Hunters consider proper docking procedures to be insufficiently intimidating. Through the nearest viewport, Jake could see angular black ships that looked like someone had crossed a stealth fighter with a bad attitude and then painted it the color of existential dread. Mechanical umbilicals extended from the ships to the station's hull, like the legs of some cosmic spider. Jake. Dr. Reeves' voice crackled over the comm. We've got unauthorized vessels attached to sections C and F. Some kind of hostile boarding action. Get to the safe room and stay put. Jake looked at Zephyr, who barely fit in the corridor and glowed like a cosmic Christmas tree. Yeah, about that hiding thing? The communication array is 3 sections away, Zephyr said. If we can reach it, I can transmit a warning to the Galactic Defense Network. But we must hurry. The sound of cutting torches echoed through the station's hull, followed by what Jake was pretty sure were jackboots on metal decking. Lots of jackboots. Right, time for Plan B. What is Plan B? Jake grabbed a maintenance cart loaded with tools and spare parts. We run like our lives depend on it, because they probably do. Also, try to duck. You're not exactly inconspicuous. They made it about 50 meters before the first Void Hunter rounded the corner. Jake had been expecting something out of a science fiction movie. Maybe sleek armor, energy weapons, the works. What he got was a 7-foot-tall humanoid in elaborate black and silver armor that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought regular intimidation needed more spikes and unnecessary glowing bits. The helmet alone had enough decorative elements to qualify as a Baroque art piece. The hunter raised a weapon that looked like a cross between a rifle and a piece of modern art, and Jake did what any reasonable maintenance worker would do when faced with advanced alien technology. He threw a wrench at it. The wrench bounced off the hunter's helmet with a satisfying clang, and the alien stumbled backward in surprise. Jake grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and triggered it, filling the corridor with dense white foam. Is this your plan? Zephyr asked as they rushed past the confused and temporarily blinded hunter. I'm improvising. You got any better ideas? Perhaps we could reason with them? You said they were mercenaries. Yes, but sometimes they can be bribed. With what? My Employee of the Month certificate. They burst through a set of double doors into the main laboratory, where 3 researchers were staring in confusion at various alarms and flashing lights. Doctor. Reeves looked up from a computer terminal, saw Jake pushing a cart while being followed by a glowing space dragon, and opened his mouth to say something that was probably going to be very complicated. Not now, Doc, Jake called out, steering the cart toward the far exit. Emergency maintenance situation. Is that a... May? Yep, very urgent. Everyone should probably hide. Behind them, Jake could hear the distinctive sound of the Void Hunter extricating himself from the fire extinguisher foam, followed by what sounded like cursing in several languages, none of them pleasant. They made it to Section D before running into the second hunter, who was apparently the type to learn from his colleagues' mistakes. This one took cover behind a support beam and opened fire with a weapon that shot bolts of crackling energy. "Okay," Jake said, diving behind an overturned table with Zephyr somehow managing to squeeze in beside him. "That's not a wrench-throwing situation." "Indeed not," agreed a new voice from the corridor's main intersection. "That would be what you humans call a surrender situation." The voice belonged to someone who had clearly taken the Void Hunter aesthetic and decided it needed more drama. The armor was more elaborate, the helmet more ornate, and the cape, because of course there was a cape, flowed behind him like liquid shadow. Even his weapon looked like it had been designed by committee to be as menacing as possible. "Commander Vex, I presume?" Zephyr called out. "Ah, the fugitive remembers my name. How gratifying." Vex's voice had the kind of theatrical resonance that suggested he practiced his villain monologues in the mirror. "Zephyr of the Aetherian Exploration Corps. You are wanted for the theft of classified military intelligence. Surrender now, and your death will be swift." "That's supposed to be the good option?" Jake whispered. "Void Hunters are not known for their generosity," Zephyr whispered back. "What if we don't surrender?" Jake called out, mostly because he was curious about the alternative. "Then your death will be prolonged and educational. I do so enjoy teaching lessons about the futility of resisting the inevitable." Jake looked at Zephyr. This guy's really committed to the whole evil overlord thing, isn't he? "It is something of a professional requirement." "Right. Well, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is that I know this station better than anyone. The bad news is that we're about 2 minutes away from being very educational examples of futility." Zephyr's patterns shifted to something that looked almost like amusement. "What do you propose?" Jake grinned and started rummaging through his maintenance cart. "Time to show these cosmic drama queens what human engineering is all about." The thing about maintenance work, Jake reflected as he jury-rigged an improvised smoke bomb from cleaning supplies and a heating element, was that it taught you to solve problems with whatever happened to be lying around. The thing about space dragons, he was learning, was that they had very different ideas about what constituted a reasonable solution to problems. "You wish to create a diversion using janitorial chemicals?" Zephyr asked, watching Jake work with what could generously be called professional interest. "It's not just janitorial chemicals," Jake said, connecting the last wire. "It's janitorial chemicals mixed with a heating element, some compressed air, and what my grandfather would have called good old-fashioned spite." He triggered the device and lobbed it down the corridor. The resulting explosion of dense, acrid smoke would have made a professional pyrotechnician proud and probably violated several safety regulations. "Move," Jake yelled, grabbing the maintenance cart and pushing it toward the service elevator at the corridor's far end. They made it to the elevator as Void Hunters stumbled through the smoke behind them, cursing in languages that probably didn't have words for maintenance worker, but were rapidly developing some very colorful ones. The elevator was, naturally, too small for a space dragon. "This is a problem," Zephyr observed. "No, this is an opportunity for creative problem solving." Jake pried open the elevator's roof access panel. "You ever do any rock climbing?" "I am a being of crystalline bone and metallic sinew. I do not climb. I soar." "Great. Well, today you're going to learn a new skill." Getting Zephyr up the elevator shaft was like trying to thread a very large, very glowing needle through a hole that was approximately 3 sizes too small. It involved a lot of creative physics, some questionable engineering decisions, and at least 2 moments where Jake was pretty sure they were both going to end up as abstract art on the shaft's bottom. They emerged on level 5 to find Dr. Reeves waiting for them with a weapon that looked suspiciously like it belonged in a military arsenal rather than a research station. "Jake," Reeves said calmly, "we need to talk." "Doc, this really isn't a good time. We've got hostiles in the building and..." I know about the hostiles, Jake. I called them. The words hit Jake like a bucket of ice water. You what? Reeves kept the weapon trained on them while activating a comm unit. Commander Vex, I have your target cornered on level 5. As agreed, my payment is the coordinates to the hegemony's advance fleet. Vex's voice crackled through the comm with obvious satisfaction. Excellent, Dr. Reeves. You have been most accommodating. Jake stared at his boss, feeling like the universe had just shifted sideways without warning. Doc, what the hell are you doing? What I have to do to save humanity, Reeves said, and there was something in his voice that suggested he actually believed it. The hegemony is coming whether we warn people or not. But if we cooperate, if we prove our value as allies rather than obstacles, maybe we can negotiate better terms for our species. Better terms? Zephyr's patterns had shifted to deep red and orange, which Jake was learning meant very bad things were about to happen. You believe the hegemony negotiates with livestock? We're not livestock. We're intelligent beings with technology, culture, military capability. You are Category 7 biological assets, Zephyr interrupted. I have seen the classification documents. Your species will be processed according to standard protocols. Breeding programs, genetic modification for enhanced labor efficiency, and systematic elimination of intellectual development to prevent resistance. Reeves' weapon wavered slightly. You're lying. I am dying, Zephyr said simply. My life signs are failing, my energy reserves are depleted, and your Void Hunter friends will kill me regardless of my cooperation. What possible reason would I have to lie? Jake could see doubt creeping into Reeves' expression, and decided this was probably a good time for some of that human stubbornness Zephyr had mentioned. Doc, you've known me for 3 years. Have I ever lied to you about anything important? No, but... Then trust me when I tell you that shooting the guy trying to save our entire species is probably not going to end well for anybody. Behind them, Jake could hear the distinctive sound of Void Hunters ascending the elevator shaft with the kind of efficiency that suggested they'd done this before. Doc, we've got maybe 30 seconds before the bad guys get here. You can either help us get to the communication array and save the world, or you can hand us over to space fascists and hope they appreciate the gesture. Your call. Reeves looked at Jake, then at Zephyr, then at the weapon in his hands. For a moment, Jake thought it could go either way. Then Reeves lowered the weapon and shook his head. 3 years of working in this frozen wasteland, and the most excitement we get is when the coffee machine breaks down. Then you show up with a space dragon and suddenly I'm choosing between saving humanity and collaborating with alien invaders. Yeah, Tuesday's been weird for everybody, Jake said. The sound of Void Hunters getting closer was growing louder, accompanied by Commander Vex's voice echoing through the station's corridors. Dr. Reeves, I grow impatient with these delays. Reeves looked at Jake and Zephyr, then keyed his comm unit. Sorry, Commander. Slight complication. The target is proving more elusive than expected. Then perhaps you require additional motivation to locate him quickly. The communication array is 2 levels up, Reeves said quietly. But it's heavily shielded. You'll need to physically access the control room. Zephyr's patterns brightened. I can transmit the warning if we can reach the array, but my injuries are worsening. I may not survive much longer. Jake looked at the space dragon who'd crashed into his quiet life and turned it upside down, then at his boss who'd just chosen saving the world over saving his own skin, and made a decision that his mother would probably describe as either heroic or catastrophically stupid. Then we better make sure you live long enough to send that message. The communication array control room was located in the station's uppermost level, which meant getting there required navigating through approximately 17 different ways to die horribly. Jake had managed to rig up a makeshift sled from equipment carts and emergency blankets to help transport Zephyr, whose bioluminescent patterns had dimmed considerably and were now pulsing in what Jake had learned was the space dragon equivalent of checking engine light. You know, Jake said as they made their way through the maintenance tunnels, most people's biggest work crisis involves figuring out the copy machine or dealing with passive-aggressive emails. I get alien invasions and homicidal space mercenaries. If it helps, Zephyr said weakly, this is also considerably outside my normal job description. Usually when I crash land on primitive worlds, the biggest danger is customs violations. Dr. Reeves, who had decided that in for a penny meant in for several billion lives, was leading them through service corridors he'd helped design 15 years ago. The array room has its own power supply and emergency lockdown protocols. If we can get there, we might be able to hold them off long enough for you to transmit your message. They were 3 levels away when Commander Vex apparently got tired of playing hide and seek. The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in red light that made the corridors look like the inside of a very concerned circulatory system. Attention, station personnel, Vex's voice echoed through the facility speakers. I have disabled your main power grid. You have 10 minutes to produce my target, or I will begin venting atmosphere from occupied sections. Can he do that? Jake asked. Unfortunately, yes, Reeves replied. The Void Hunters specialize in hostile boarding actions. They know how to turn a space station's own systems against its occupants. Zephyr tried to lift his head, failed, and settled for making his patterns flash brighter. The transmission will take approximately 8 minutes once I reach the array. We have insufficient time for stealth. Jake looked at the space dragon, then at the maintenance equipment around them, then at Dr. Reeves, who was looking like someone who'd just realized that choosing to save the world came with a significant chance of not living to see how it turned out. Doc, remember when you said this place was built to withstand anything? Yes, but the Void Hunters have technology that. No, I mean built to withstand anything by humans using human engineering, with human safety protocols and human backup systems. Reeves frowned. What are you getting at? Jake grinned, and it was the kind of grin that usually preceded either brilliant solutions or spectacular disasters. I'm getting at the fact that these space drama queens have probably never dealt with a maintenance worker who takes personal offense at people messing with his station. He started pulling equipment from the walls, emergency repair kits, atmospheric processors, backup life support systems, and what appeared to be enough spare parts to build a small spacecraft. Jake, what are you doing? What I do best. Fixing things that are broken. He looked up at the ceiling, where the main power conduits ran toward the communication array. In this case, fixing the problem of Void Hunters thinking they can waltz into my workplace and start making threats. The plan that Jake outlined over the next 3 minutes was the kind of thing that would have made safety inspectors weep and insurance companies cancel policies. It involved rerouting power through systems that weren't designed to handle it, overriding safety protocols that existed for very good reasons, and turning the station's own infrastructure into what could generously be called an improvised defense system. This is insane, Reeves said. This is human engineering, Jake corrected. We're the species that looked at flight and said, hold my beer. You think a few aliens with fancy armor are going to stop us? Zephyr's patterns shifted to something that looked like admiration mixed with concern. Your plan has a significant probability of catastrophic failure. Yeah, but it also has a small probability of spectacular success, and that's good enough for me. They reached the generator room to find it already occupied by 2 Void Hunters who were busy doing something technical and probably destructive to the main power coupling. Jake took one look at the situation, grabbed a high-pressure coolant line, and opened the valve. The resulting geyser of supercooled fluid caught both aliens completely by surprise. Their armor might have been designed to withstand energy weapons and explosive impacts, but it apparently hadn't been tested against industrial refrigeration systems. That was surprisingly effective, Zephyr observed as the hunters stumbled around, temporarily blinded and covered in rapidly freezing coolant. Human engineering principle number 1, Jake said, wiring explosive charges around the generator's safety housing. When in doubt, hit it with something it wasn't designed to handle. The explosion that followed was considerably more impressive than Jake had intended, but wait now. One out away. It accomplished the goal of routing emergency power through the communication array while simultaneously making the generator room unsuitable for further Void Hunter occupation. They reached the array control room with 2 minutes to spare and found Commander Vex waiting for them. Ah, the maintenance worker and his pet dragon. How refreshingly predictable. Vex had apparently decided that the situation called for extra dramatic flair, because he'd added additional cape elements and his armor was now sporting what appeared to be entirely decorative spikes and glowing components. Seriously? Jake said, looking at the ensemble. Did you stop to change costumes while chasing us? Intimidation is an art form, Vex replied. One does not simply appear before one's enemies dressed for casual occasions. Right. Well, here's the thing about intimidation. Jake stepped forward, wrench in hand. It works a lot better when you're dealing with people who haven't spent the last 3 years keeping life support systems running in sub-zero temperatures while living on instant coffee and existential dread. Vex raised his weapon. Your primitive tools are no match for. The lights went out again, but this time it was because Jake had triggered the emergency power rerouting sequence he'd jury-rigged in the generator room. In the darkness, Zephyr's bioluminescent patterns blazed to life like a cosmic lighthouse, temporarily blinding anyone who'd been relying on artificial light. Jake tackled Commander Vex around the knees, which turned out to be surprisingly effective against someone who'd been expecting dramatic posturing rather than straightforward violence. Zephyr. The array. The space dragon dragged himself to the communication console and began the transmission process, his patterns shifting through complex sequences that looked like a conversation conducted in living light. Vex threw Jake off and raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Dr. Reeves hit him with a fire extinguisher. You know, Reeves said conversationally, I've been wanting to do that to someone for 15 years. The warning transmission took exactly 8 minutes and 37 seconds, during which Jake learned several important things about space combat. First, void hunters were much less intimidating when they were unconscious. Second, space dragons apparently transmitted data by singing, if singing could be described as creating harmonics that made reality itself seem to vibrate in sympathy. Third, the Galactic Defense Network's response time was approximately 3 minutes, which was either very efficient or suggested they'd been expecting this call. The first ships to arrive weren't human, which made sense since humanity wasn't technically part of the Galactic Defense Network yet. They were sleek, elegant vessels that moved like they were dancing rather than flying, and they made the Void Hunter ships look like flying garbage containers by comparison. Aetherian Defense Corps, Zephyr explained weakly as the newcomers efficiently disabled the Void Hunter vessels. In my people's military wing. They have been tracking the hegemony's movements for months. Commander Vex, who had regained consciousness just in time to watch his ships being systematically dismantled, seemed to be having some kind of philosophical crisis. This is impossible, he muttered. The target was isolated, defenseless, accompanied only by primitive natives with basic technology. Yeah, about that, Jake said, securing Vex's hands with zip ties that were definitely not rated for restraining alien war criminals but seemed to be working anyway. You might want to update your files on primitive natives. The next few hours were a blur of activity that Jake would later describe as the weirdest first contact scenario in history. The Aetherian Defense Corps medics worked on Zephyr while their security personnel processed the captured Void Hunters. Meanwhile, Jake found himself giving a detailed report about the invasion warning to beings who looked like they'd stepped out of a particularly artistic science fiction movie. Your species has impressed us, the Aetherian commander told Jake. Few beings would risk their lives to aid a stranger, particularly when that stranger represented potential danger to their own people. Yeah, well, we're kind of stupid that way, Jake replied. Plus, it seemed like the right thing to do. Dr. Reeves, who was still processing the fact that he'd gone from research station director to intergalactic incident participant in the span of a few hours, was handling the documentation requirements with the same methodical approach he used for scientific papers. So what happens now? He asked. Now, the commander said, your world will be placed under Aetherian protection while the Galactic Council debates formal first contact protocols. The hegemony will not be permitted to enter this system. And Zephyr? The commander's expression, as much as Jake could read alien facial expressions, suggested good news. Zephyr will recover fully. The information he carried has allowed us to locate and interdict 3 hegemony advance fleets. This victory will be remembered. Zephyr, looking considerably better, after whatever the space medics had done to him, approached Jake with something that might have been a smile. Jake Martinez, maintenance and repair specialist. I owe you a debt that cannot be repaid. Hey, no big deal, just doing my job. Your job description does not include saving galactic civilizations. Jake shrugged. Yeah, but my job description also doesn't include dealing with frozen communication dishes and coffee machines that require percussive maintenance to function properly. Sometimes you just do what needs doing. Zephyr's patterns shifted to warm gold and silver. The Aetherian Exploration Corps could use someone with your particular talents. We encounter many situations that require unconventional solutions. Jake looked around at the research station, with its ice-covered windows and perpetually malfunctioning heating system, then at the elegant Aetherian ships visible through the viewports. You know what? I've been thinking it might be time for a career change. 6 months later, Jake Martinez became the first human to join the Aetherian Exploration Corps, where his unofficial job title was Specialist in Applied Human Stubbornness. His first mission report noted that when dealing with impossible situations, the key was to remember that impossible was just another word for hasn't been tried by someone with enough coffee and insufficient regard for proper procedures. The report also noted that while humans might not be the strongest, fastest, or smartest species in the galaxy, they had one crucial advantage. They were too stubborn to know when they were supposed to give up. The hegemony, upon learning that their invasion plans had been thwarted by a maintenance worker with a toolbox and a space dragon with a message, reportedly updated their threat assessment protocols to include a new category: deceptively primitive species with inexplicable problem-solving capabilities. Dr. Reeves remained at Arcturus Research Station, though his work now included serving as Earth's unofficial liaison to the galactic community. His reports back to Earth began with the phrase, "You're not going to believe this, but," and usually ended with requisition requests for equipment that technically didn't exist yet. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, a small blue-green planet continued its orbit around an unremarkable star, blissfully unaware that its newest galactic representative was a maintenance technician who had once defeated an alien invasion force with determination, improvised weapons, and the kind of stubborn ingenuity that comes from years of fixing things that weren't supposed to break in the first place. The universe, as Jake had learned, was full of impossible things. The trick was remembering that impossible was just another maintenance problem waiting for the right tool and enough stubborn persistence to solve it.